We have Justin Phelps, attorney at law, and Dr. Keron Niles, specialist in international relations, international law. Good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Rishi. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Very well.
So I want to start by getting your views. You know, how did we get to this point where all of these international countries are now looking at what is happening in Venezuela and they want this election?
I beg your pardon?
How do you think we got to this position? How did we get to this position where so many countries are now paying attention to what is happening to Venezuela and they seem to want this election?
I think the issue is that Maduro has refashioned the National Assembly after it was taken over by opposition parties back in 2015, 2016. And since then, the international community has been focused on whether he is undermining democracy in Venezuela.
And now you have all of these countries paying attention to what is going on. And there are a lot of external pressures for Venezuela to call this election. What are your thoughts? Do you think we should have so much of international countries getting involved in the internal politics of Venezuela?
Well, international politics is not like national politics, is it? The primary force in international politics is military power. The Americans have always believed, under the Monroe Doctrine, that they have a right to chart the course of the Americas, and that is why they are focused. The other countries fall into line according to their own interests. And there's a degree of unreality in thinking that it doesn't have anything at all to do with Venezuela's oil reserves. So what you are seeing happening, I think, in the international community is America is pursuing its gunboat diplomacy, and other countries, because of their relationships with America, are either falling into line or not.
Justin Phelps, I'm going to bring in Dr. Keron Niles now and ask him, when can a country lawfully enter another country under international law? Dr. Niles?
Well, good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and good morning, Lisa, and with you as well. So the UN Charter lays down the principles, the foundational principles, whereby what we would call coercive measures or the use of force actually comes into play. Specifically, chapters 6 and 7 of the UN Charter address the mechanisms for dealing with issues concerning international peace and security. This is really, really important in order to avoid all-out war. So chapter 6 actually encourages countries to solve their disputes through peaceful means, such as mediation, negotiation, arbitration, and judicial settlement. And they are to do that without undermining the authority of the Security Council. And that's really, really important in this regard. So before the use of force even becomes a question, before entering Venezuela becomes a question, the UN Charter actually spells out how coercive measures should be considered. So before we even begin to talk about a country entering into another, Article 41 of the Charter actually speaks specifically to the use of complete or partial interruption of economic relations, which has already been going on, which is sanctions actually, to interrupting rail and sea and air and postal and telegraphic and radio and other means of communication, interrupting those first, and also to the severance of the diplomatic relations. What the picture I'm trying to paint here, Trinidad and Tobago, is that there are stages that we go through before even considering the use of force. And so, as far as the UN Charter goes, as far as we're concerned, the use of force is as a last resort. And that's also reflected in Article 42 of the UN Charter. And I think that's important for us to remember that there are stages that should actually be acknowledged before consideration is given to the use of force and entering another country, which is actually an act of war.
Justin, I want to bring you in here as well because our government has opted not to take a side. Do you think that is the right decision?
Yes, I think that is clearly the right decision. We have to bear in mind that what we see coming out of the United States of America and Europe are foreign policies being articulated that they have articulated because of their own reasons. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are nearer to Venezuela, and we have a different foreign policy we always have had, which is not based on the notion that we are entitled to interfere or intervene in the democratic functioning of other countries. What has happened here is that the United States of America is seizing upon difficulties or complications brought about by Maduro in the democratic functioning of Venezuela. Whether those things amount to a reason to enter or intervene in the politics of a country, the answer to that is clearly no. And I think what is being missed in the commentary about Venezuela now is that Donald Trump had about a year ago been thinking about invading Venezuela, and that was widely reported. So that if you look back, you will see that what is happening in Venezuela today is not an entirely new current event. In fact, in 2018, he had been asking his security advisors to advise him on how to go about invading Venezuela. And all of that has to do with the American attitude to international politics, which really comes down to its military power being used to enforce what it thinks its strategic interests are. And there's precedent for that. I mean, the Monroe Doctrine has been in effect and re-articulated with varying degrees of confidence by America since the 1800s. America did the same thing in Chile in 1973 when they deposed or assisted the opposition in deposing Allende. And what we're talking about now is not only military but strategic intervention in Venezuela, because as you would have seen reported, what they have done is they have taken to supporting the opposition leader. And all of that circumvents both the legal process in Venezuela and its sovereignty. And for all of those reasons, I think the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister is perfectly right to say we would rather not involve ourselves. I think that the one refinement that I think has also been missed about the position of the Prime Minister is that he has not said that if Venezuela democratically elects the opposition leader next month, that he would not deal with him. So he has taken a purely neutral position, and I think that must be the right position for Trinidad and Tobago.
Both Justin and Dr. Niles, I know most people are asking, how can this affect us here in Trinidad and Tobago? But before we answer that question, there are those who are, particularly Venezuelans, who have fled the conditions in Venezuela and who say that the elections were not free and fair. Maduro is not the legitimate president based on the terms and conditions of the Constitution of Venezuela and the National Assembly and so on. Should there be fresh elections? How do you speak to that? And I'm throwing it out to both of you.
I'm sorry, I haven't heard every word because the line...
Mr. Phelps, should I go or should I... Can you guys hear me?
Yes, the question is, how do you speak to the Venezuelans who are fleeing because they're saying that the conditions are very dire? Maduro is not legitimate. The elections were not free and fair. International observers say that the elections were not free and fair. And so to stabilize the situation, he needs to be removed. And, how do you speak to that?
So the issue here actually relates to the legitimacy of the election process that happened recently. Now, I'm not an expert in Latin American politics, and I've not read the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And so I can't actually speak to the legitimacy of the election also because I wasn't there. And so one of the critical issues that many nations are actually commenting on now and actually making judgments upon is the validity of those elections, right? Regardless of which perspective you hold, it is also important to remember that when you listen to different comments from different nations, always remember that different nations have different interests. And so you need to also think about what are the different vested interests of different countries. There are huge Chinese investments uh, in Venezuela, and there's a lot of interest on the side of the West as well in Venezuela as well. Also, because Venezuela is sitting on massive reserves of petroleum. And so there's a lot of interest in Venezuela for a number of reasons. And so I think we all need to take that into account, but we also need to make sure that we humanize this problem. This is not just about an electoral issue. It's about the people that are actually suffering and what's actually in their best interest. And certainly, if the nationals of Trinidad and Tobago can do nothing else, we can certainly make Venezuelans that come to Trinidad and Tobago feel more at home because of the state of their own country. You don't have to be an expert in international politics to extend an olive branch and a welcome response to those Venezuelans fleeing their country to come here. That's the least that we can do. Even if we don't understand the international politics and the electoral process and what's going on, we have a responsibility at the ground level in Trinidad and Tobago as well.
Justin, how do you see all of what is happening affecting Trinidad and Tobago now and in the future?
Well, if I can just deal with one of the matters that Lisa raised, and that is the opposition objections to the elections. There will always be, and there always are in democracies, oppositions who take the position that the election has not been free and fair. And that does not justify any other country intervening in the democratic process. The usual way in which that plays out is that you have recourse to the court system, and a court independent of the executive determines whether or not the election should be gone through again or not. Coming to your question, how it affects Trinidad and what will happen in the future, the answer to that is clearly that I don't know. I think that my fear is that because the American foreign policy is fairly described as being interventionist, and because the Venezuelan identity is nationalistic or patriotic, I am fearful that it becomes prolonged, so that there would be sanctions imposed and the thing drags out. That is not good for us, because there is a humanitarian issue developing where we have an influx of a large number of Venezuelans, and I'm not sure that we have the capacity to absorb them. I don't know, but that is one of my fears. At the end of the day, because of Maduro's posture, I think that it may drag out. I think that the Americans will have to now, having taken an initial position, impose sanctions. And I don't think that we are affected, because I think that we've taken the right position in the long run, I mean, so that whoever is installed as the legitimate head of Venezuela in a month or 2 months or 3 months' time, I think that we would have it would be open to us to have a perfectly healthy trading relationship and diplomatic relationship with them.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Justin Phelps, attorney, and also Dr. Keron Niles of the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies, for joining us this morning and sharing your thoughts on this current situation and what is happening in Venezuela.
Yes,
Lisa,
we're going to have to keep our eyes on this, and perhaps throughout the week we'll be inviting guests to come and help us to flesh it out, because they're just right next door.
And also Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, he is in the United States. He left yesterday, and he is supposed to be meeting with the United Nations Secretary General today, along with the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Dennis Moses. So that is also something we'll keep monitoring.